Hello and welcome to the Print Uninterrupted. I am Bidisha, Consulting Editor for Economics at The Print. Joining us today is Saurabh Mukherjea. Thank you, Saurabh, for joining and for welcoming you to The Print Uninterrupted. Saurabh is the founder and the chief investment officer of Marcellus Investment Managers. He studied economics at the London School of Economics, first in his bachelor's and with a distinction in his master's. Before Marcellus, he was the CEO of Ambit Capital, and before that, he co founded Clear Capital in London. He's also a founding director of the Association of Portfolio Managers in India, and he sits on several SEBI committees that help shape how money is managed in this country. Saurabh, welcome once again to
Thank
the
you.
Print.
Thank you, Vidisha. Thank you.
Saurabh, just to give, of course, you are aware, but it's been kind of a heavy week, or the past couple of weeks have been heavy for India's institutions, right? And a new education minister taking charge, students out on the streets over exam leaks. There's kind of a real mood right now that the
Mhm.
systems we rely on aren't really holding up the way they used to. And in some ways that's exactly the bigger question. I believe, or at least a part of this question that your piece is asking, your latest
Mm.
article is asking, but Nandita, except you are asking it about the nation state itself. So let's begin there. You're saying
Sure.
something quite bold, that the 150-year-old idea of the nation state, the thing every country is built on, is actually weakening. So my question in simple terms is, what convinced you that this is a real lasting shift, and not just something the world has been through before and adjusted to?
Sure. So look, I think when events like the events that transpired at Jantar Mantar take place, the human instinct is to see it as a specific episode and try to come up with event specific explanations and say that this was a one off. But we are seeing too many such events across the world, Vidisha, and we're seeing them for an extended period of time now, right? So, for example, the student disturbances in Bangladesh, those in Nepal, and I've seen similar episodes in the Western world as well, right? And we've been now seeing this for the best part of a decade, where across the world you have very bold, very strong leaders making all sorts of strong claims, saying that they will bring back a lost age of national glory, and the template is incredibly similar. So when you listen to say, or when I used to listen to Orban speak in Hungary, it was hard to distinguish whether it was Orban or Trump speaking about MAGA, and the Trump template of MAGA is very similar to what I've seen the European far right talk about, lost age of glory. In fact, there's a name given to such people now. They're called old believers, people who believe that their country once was great and that greatness will be rediscovered if only certain things are done right. But what's remarkable is alongside all the strong rhetoric, if you look at data on tax collections or tax to GDP, you look at data on foreign capital flows, you look at data on state control of the commanding heights of the economy, which are usually around technology and manufacturing, all of that is actually slipping away across the world. So the rhetoric is very strong and bold and very masculine, but the economic outcomes, the day-to-day economic reality is actually quite grim, and that actually is the fault line on which these student protests are taking place. So we sort of sat and thought about it, and then gradually what we realized, what Nandita and I realized, is that these are not country-specific episodes. This is actually there's a global pattern, and the global pattern has broadly three specific dimensions to it, Bidisha. The first is tax collections are becoming harder and harder to deliver for national governments. So if they try to tax high net worth people, the high net worth people move to tax free jurisdictions such as Dubai. If they try to tax corporates, the corporates also decamp to places like Ireland. And if they try to tax foreign investors, the foreign investor says, "Thank you very much, we're not investing in your country." Right? We've seen that happen in India, but when I visit the UK is actually in a very similar boat. Whenever the British government tries to tax high net worth people, they see a flurry of people relocating either to Switzerland or to Dubai. Right. In my case, in India, we manage money for rich people in India. My trips to Dubai had become more and more frequent. The Iran war got in the way, but again, in August, we're back to visiting Dubai, because so much of the wealth that used to sit in South Bombay and South Delhi has now decamped to Dubai, right? So that's the first issue we are saying. And just to keep it give a simple factoid around this, global corporate tax rates have halved in 40 years, right? That's the extent to which the state is struggling to tax corporates, right? And once the state loses the ability to tax, remember the whole construct that Bismarck in Germany created in 1860, the construct of the nation state that Bismarck pioneered and Germany pioneered in 1860 was the state will be able to tax, and it will use those taxes to deliver things such as healthcare, law and order, a police force, and so on. So the state's inability to tax, I think, strikes at the heart of the ability of a nation state to provide those public services. The second challenge is the commanding heights of the economy, which is manufacturing and technology. Those have now slipped away from most countries. America controls the technology and China controls the manufacturing, right? So it's not accidental that I'm doing this call with you on a laptop which is Chinese, made in China, but the software is American, right? And I'm sure most people listening to this podcast will have a similar combination, right? So when the state loses control of the commanding heights of the economy, its ability to hold on to corporate profits is diminished, because America will use the technology to pull away profits from India through licensing fees, token fees for AI, and China will use its grip on manufacturing to pull away manufacturing profits away from India, right? So, for example, the fact that the Chinese control the rare earths industry in totality means that China will use, in fact, China has explicitly weaponized rare earths to suck profits out of India, right? So that's the second challenge, that you end up seeing profits getting pulled away from peripheral countries such as India or Bangladesh or Nepal towards the core, which is America for tech and China for manufacturing, and profits migrate from the periphery to the center, which in turn makes it harder for the nation state to finance itself, because if you don't have profits, what exactly, if you don't have value added economic activity, what exactly are you gonna tax? The third piece is jobs, right? As we've discussed in our previous pods, Bidisha, as we've discussed in our book Breakpoint, what Nandita and I've described in Breakpoint is that for the first time since 1991, white collar job creation in India has come to a standstill. We're seeing similar dynamics in the Western world again. AI is partly the culprit here. But as job creation, as formal job creation diminishes, global gig work is becoming the template, right? So professionals, increasingly white collar professionals, are earning a livelihood by sitting in India perhaps, but they might be managing the social media account of a Swedish biscuit company, or they might be building a CRM platform for a Tanzanian restaurant chain, right? But as you move away from salaried employment, which is easy to tax, to global gig work, which is much harder to tax, again the tax base gets crunched. Again, the ability of the sovereign of this nation state to run affairs comes into question. So on three different fronts, the world over, we're seeing the construct of the nation state getting pushed back. In fact, increasingly, many of the functions of the nation state are being fulfilled by giant American or Chinese companies who are using their technology to extract effectively what are taxes, right? So if we are paying this, the software that we are using for the podcast is American. When we are paying the license fees for this, or if you're using AI tokens, effectively it's a new form of tax. And the American digital media companies actually have more coercive power than actually the state. Right? It's very interesting how both taxation power and coercive power are joined at the hip, and how both of them are leaking away from the nation state and to the global tech giants.
Interesting, Saurabh. So I feel like if there are three pillars, or probably if we can segregate this interesting piece that you've written, it would be, of course, first taxation, and then technology and sovereignty, and then, of course, labor and gig work, and a bit of crypto as well. I have a question which I'll
Hmm.
come to later on.
Yeah.
So right now, let's just take the first piece, right? Taxation that you spoke about. You say that it's becoming harder for governments to tax big companies and rich investors everywhere, because that money can simply now move to another country, as you spoke about Dubai, and or individuals settling to Switzerland. So you point now coming to India, and you point to India's own 2019 tax cut as an example. So my question is, do you think, especially for an emerging economy, is the government slowly losing its biggest tool for raising money?
So let's take India. I think since we live here and since India has expedited so many tax cuts in the last 6 years, it's actually a particularly instructive example. So, for those who are younger, I'll walk them back a little bit. A decade ago, in 2016, there was a big hoo-ha in India that if we expedite GST, it'll be unified indirect tax collection nationally, and that will lead to better tax efficiency. There'll be greater tax buoyancy. The economy will be more formalized, and so on and so forth. Right. So we're 10 years into GST. We're 10
Mm,
years since GST. 2017 GST came into existence. We're now in 2026. Tax to GDP in India is unchanged. Right. In fact, it's a little lower than it was a decade ago. So GST leading to tax buoyancy actually hasn't really happened. In fact, last year in 2025 September, the government expedited a pretty hefty round of GST cuts because there were issues around the level of GST, right?
mm,
So corporate tax rates, India cut in 2019. It was a big corporate tax rate cut. In September 2019, the FM announced it. It kicked in from March 2020 or April 2020. Effectively, the corporate tax rate got cut from 35 to 25%, and for new manufacturing to as low as 17%. Right? I didn't see any corporate capex response to it. My thinking was, even I thought there would be, given how generous the FM was in delivering those tax cuts. I thought there would be a corporate capex response. There wasn't any. And even to this day, it's actually a startling demonstration of how you can cut taxes, corporate taxes, and yet not get any, not be better off in terms of economic activity. Then let's come to the third pillar, income taxes.
mm,
Right, as we discussed at the top end of the income curve,
mm.
millionaires are decamping to Dubai, billionaires are decamping to Dubai because they can live tax-free lives there. But even at the other end, at the entry level taxation, last year in the in the Feb 2025 budget, the finance minister cut the entry level slab from 5 lakhs, she made it 12 lakhs, right? Which obviously led to a meaningful reduction in tax collections. And again, it's not clear that other than some temporary upsurge in consumption activity, it's going to lead to sustainable economic gains. So I find it fascinating that we as a country are cutting indirect taxes, GST, corporate taxes, and income taxes. Tax cut after tax cut has been delivered. Naturally, the fisc is getting challenged on account of that. The government has to borrow more. If the government is cutting taxes every other year, there are hefty tax cuts being delivered. The government is having to borrow more, which in turn is leading to the RBI having to print more money to finance the government's borrowing. This is clearly visible in the RBI balance sheet, folks. You can see the RBI's holding of Government of India bonds is ramping every year because the RBI is having to buy those government bonds in the bond market. There simply aren't enough corporate takers for those government bonds, which is effectively printing press finance, which puts downward pressure on the rupee. So India is a good case study, but for those who believe that India is exceptional, it isn't. United Kingdom is going through a very similar pattern, where they're cutting tax rates, but it's not leading to uptake. Then they're trying to tax the rich. The rich are then fleeing, which is leading to further budget deficits, which the Bank of England is financing, which is putting pressure on the currency.
So interesting. I mean, this is where, of course, if the RBI, if the only tool that is left for the RBI is to print more money, then that puts even more pressure from the monetary policy angle, right? My question from here moves to the second piece, that is technology. That you say that apart from America
Mm.
and China, no country really controls the technology, or rather, let's say, even from the manufacturing angle as well. But let's focus on
Yeah.
technology right now that runs the modern world. It can be the chips, the AI, the energy systems. Now India has been trying, and there have been dialogues on and off, to catch up with things like the AI mission and data localization rules. But you call this quote unquote modest compared to the gap. So my question is India and most of the world just along for the ride here? Do you see something constructive coming out of this, or will it still be continue to be America and China, and they emerge as sort of the global powers?
Yeah. So So, at a just addressing the question at its simplest level first, Bidisha. First is the reason America and China are so far ahead of the rest of the world is the amounts they spend on technology compared to the rest of the world. So, for example, in 2026, the American tech giants are spending around $800 billion on capex, on AI, on data centers. China is far behind, but even China's 40-50 billion dollars pales into our couple of $1 billion. India is spending the best part of a couple of billion. But our couple of billion pales into insignificance compared to China's 40-50 billion, and America is in a different stratosphere at close to, I think, $800 billion of spend on tech. So one of the reasons these two countries, America and China, are so far ahead of the rest of us on tech is that the sheer spending by their private sector on technology is orders of magnitude bigger than anything India can afford. But there's also a more perplexing point, right? So we could say in India that, look, the government is fiscally constrained, and how can it spend more than a couple of billion? Whatever the government has done by way of creating Sarvam is a decent step. Plus, the government has got India's space program off to a decent footing. The more perplexing part is, why don't Indian companies spend, right? So Indian companies have reasonable balance sheets now. They can afford to spend, between our IT services companies, they can afford to spend a couple of billion. Between our pharma companies, they can afford to spend a couple of billion, right? So why don't Indian corporates spend? And I think that's a more interesting question. It goes back to Indian corporates being keener to do capex abroad than to spend money on R&D or capex in India, right? We've discussed this in some of our research in Marcellus, that we are seeing the biggest outward flow of investment by Indian corporates who are setting up multi-billion-dollar plants in America, rather than doing capex in India, right? And this is in a way, again, goes back to the question of the nation state, because effectively large Indian corporates are saying, we have money, we don't want to spend that on bringing AI to India, or bringing brand new pharmaceutical products to India, bring new drugs to India. We are happy to use that money to buy companies in America or set up fresh plant and equipment in America, right? So if Indian corporates themselves are effectively saying our money will be invested abroad, that hits at the heart of the nation state, because if the Indian corporates invest abroad, that generates tax dollars over there in America. If Indian corporates spend 10, 20, $30 billion buying companies in America or setting up plant in America, it generates tax dollars in America, not in India, which in turn undermines the nation state back home in India further. So starting at the simplest level, we are seeing American and Chinese companies do capex on a scale the rest of the world cannot match. That in turn is putting the American and Chinese companies at the vanguard of building technologies that the rest of us need, which we then pay America and China for. We pay China for the rare earths, we pay America for AI, the licenses and the tokens. And then finally, companies in India, and indeed other countries like India, they are choosing to do their own capex in America, which in turn hits the nation state story. It hits the nation state story. It undermines the nation state story fundamentally, because it means jobs are created in America, not India. Tax dollars are created in America, not India.
Um, this is kind of a follow-up question to what you said, because in the last episode, the discussion that we had on capital gains tax, and we had spoken about foreign portfolio investment and foreign direct investment, right? And right now there have been multiple times that there have been, discussions extensively around that our net FDI has fallen to an all-time low. I mean, from
Hmm.
40 billion to right now 0.4 billion, something of that sort. So then, does this also, because now we are kind of focusing on Viksit Bharat 2047, and we are targeting on, sort of attracting more and more FDI, does that not hit the FDI angle as well and discourage investors even further?
Yeah. So the FDI piece is what I was referring to. On a net basis,
Mhm.
we are close to zero on FDI now, because Indian companies are taking money out of the country, and American companies are not really rushing in it with any great ferocity. As we discussed, Indian monies are taking money out of the country because they're saying we are better off setting new plants or acquiring companies in America, right?
Oh,
If Indian companies themselves are putting more money in America than in India, it's leading to job creation in America and creation of tax dollars in America rather than back home in India. And that in turn means that the RBI has to print more money to finance the government's budget deficit. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is the FII dimension, where,
yeah.
as we've discussed over the last 2.5 years, FIIs have pulled $70 billion out of the Indian market. And the FII point is no other country barring India taxes
Mm,
incoming foreign capital. And hence the FII is saying we are simply not willing to come here and invest if you're going to whack a 20% short term tax on us and a 12.5% long term capital gains tax on us. Hence, we've written a piece for the print. I've also
mm,
commented on social media. I've also requested the government to say, can we please get rid of this, of at least long-term capital gains tax on FIIs, so that FII money comes in and at least lends support to India's balance of payments. Subsequent to my doing the pod with you, Bidisha, um, I did a discussion with Mohandas Pai and Marcellus's clients. And Mohandas Pai ji came up with an interesting idea. He said, look, if we are not in a position to give a permanent reduction in long-term capital gains tax to FIIs, let's announce a 5-year capital gains tax holiday on FIIs. And in those 5 years, let's try to attract foreign institutional investors to come and put money in the Indian stock market. It'll boost our balance of payments, boost our forex reserves. It'll potentially lower the 10-year government of India bond yield, thus allowing the government to borrow cheaper in the bond market. And whichever foreign investor comes in during the 5 years, he or she can be then grandfathered beyond the 5-year horizon, i.e., even if they redeem after the 5 years, they still get the CGT forgiveness. That's an interesting idea, but we need ideas of this sort. Either we give foreign investors a 5-year forgiveness on CGT, or we get rid of CGT on foreigners, because as we said, no other large market does it. Smaller markets like Kenya and South Africa charge foreign investors. And as soon as we are in the company of markets like Kenya and South Africa, we know that we have a problem on our hands.
Interesting. So now coming to the third piece,
Hmm.
the third section of the article, which is labor. So now you point out that less than 40 million Indians can actually pay meaningful income tax out of a population of over a billion. And you say that more work is shifting to gig platforms, sometimes paid in crypto as well, which the government simply cannot see or either tax. So my question is the taxman basically losing sight, of a growing part of the economy? And what is the solution then? What is the way forward? How can government kind of navigate through this problem?
So if we refer to Niti Aayog's research on this, Bidisha, it's actually very interesting. The Niti Aayog has published research saying that currently roughly 8 million Indians are doing gig work. So Swiggy, Zomato, Uber, Ola type. And by 2030, Niti Aayog is saying this number will be close to 25 million, right? In parallel, we know that white collar job creation is at a standstill in Breakpoint. We gave plenty of data that white collar job creation is at a standstill. Azim Premji University, in its State of Working India 2026 report, is showing that out of every 100 graduates coming out of college, only 4 are getting full-time jobs. 96 actually have nothing to do, right? So joining the dots, it does look like increasing number of graduates will end up doing gig work. And as I said, the Niti Aayog work also points in that direction, right? Now, we're seeing on platforms like Upwork. Upwork is a listed platform in America. We're seeing on platforms like Upwork, Indians are finding gainful employment. Either they're doing data cleaning, bot training for smaller European or American companies, or they're managing social media accounts for companies across the world. So it does look like this will become a new type of life where you graduate from college, but you become a global gig worker. And at one point in time, you could be doing multiple gigs, right? So you're a very hardworking woman, you're doing multiple gigs. So increasingly, you'll become the template for other Indians. They'll try to keep up with you and try to do 2 or 3 things together, right? And they might do that sitting in their, say, native residence in Coorg or Coimbatore, rather than having to go and live in a big city like Delhi or Bombay, right? Now all of this is actually, to my mind, quite positive because it frees up employees from having to depend on one employer. The challenge is for the taxman. The employee is going to be fine, I think, because the employee will find we're entrepreneurial people. These global gig work platforms are increasingly user friendly, and they will do a better job of matching skills with employers or labor providers with labor seekers, right? So these global gig work platforms are for profit businesses. They have every incentive to use clever tech to match buyers and sellers of labor. The challenge is for the taxman because once I start doing global gig work, it's self-evident to me that I will end up with a bank account abroad, or as you pointed out, potentially a crypto account abroad. Already, Indians seem to have by far the most number of crypto accounts in the world. By far, Indians have the most number of crypto accounts in the world, and something tells me they're not just using those crypto accounts for their holiday money. I suspect Indians have serious money in their crypto accounts. I don't have an answer to how the nation state pulls this one back. I think this is a combination of global tech. Right? Global tech has moved to such a level of sophistication that the nation state simply cannot control it anymore. In fact, as I was saying, global tech now has more coercive power than, ironically, I think the nation state itself. Global tech has more taxation power, but then taken to its logical extreme, global tech becomes the medium via which you find your employment. Global tech platforms become the medium via which you execute your employment or your livelihood, but that ends up resulting in income earned either in crypto or in a bank account abroad. I really can't figure out how the nation state will be able to get their wrap their heads around this, which is why we ended up writing the piece for you guys saying, as far as I can see, the modern nation state is going to fade away over the next 10 years. And you end up in a very different era with very different investment constructs compared to the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Interesting. I mean, especially when it comes to crypto or Bitcoin technology or global tech, as you spoke about, I feel like what America is doing at this present moment is they've given up on having discussions on how to control it, but having more discussions on how to regulate it. So I think India should also increase, on that front because as you very rightly stated, when global tech becomes this big, you can't control it. You should focus on the regulation bit of it. I think that's a very imperative point. Now coming to bringing all the three pieces together, um, sort of weaker tax collection, weaker control of technology, and income that's harder to track, or money that's coming in which is harder to track. And you conclude that, and not just I've been part of discussions that Indians should stop putting all their savings only into Indian stocks and invest more in America or other global markets too. So, my question to you, Saurabh, is that in one line or probably a couple of lines, why should someone who's watching this podcast, who's worried about their own savings, actually act on that advice at this?
Yeah.
How
So
critical is the
yeah.
situation?
So because I'm a little older than you, I've seen a few shifts in how Indians think about saving. So in the 80s, my mom dad, right? My mom dad were middle class Bengali office workers in Delhi. So their only savings were fixed deposits and national saving certificates. If I had mentioned the stock market to them, I was in school then, but suppose I had mentioned the stock market to them, they would have said it's a casino, and unsavory people invest over there, would have been their middle class Bengali view in the 80s, right? But as people like me grew up, I realized, hey, actually the stock market is not some casino where naughty people work. The stock market can be a perfectly respectable activity. And then I went on to write books, which played their part in convincing 50 million middle class families that the Indian stock market, is a safe place to keep your money. So we migrated as a country from seeing the stock market as some gambling den and only having FDs and national savings certificates to realizing, hey, FDs and national savings certificates by themselves, just by that, if that's all we have, that can be quite dangerous because often they give you negative real rates of return. So let's put some money in the stock market and enrich ourselves. I think from that, we're now gradually moving into a world where people realize that the Indian market is tiny. It's 3% of the global market. It makes sense to diversify. It makes sense to diversify. Leaving aside whatever happens to the nation state, it makes sense for Indians to globally diversify. And through Gift City in Gujarat, through Gift City in Gujarat, the government has made it cost efficient and tax efficient for Indians to diversify globally, right? But in this pod, we're making a further point. The further point we're making is it is relatively clear now. We can see the methods through which profits are leaking out of countries like India, like the UK. Profits are leaking out of countries like India and the UK. Tax dollars are leaking out of countries like India and the UK, and those are ending up in China. They're ending up in America. And if you and I want to profit from that, right? Because I don't think you and I can sit here and say we will change the pattern of history. We will now bring back the glory of the nation state. I don't think that's a realistic point of view. If we understand that the world is changing and we want to benefit from that, then putting more of our money abroad allows us to benefit from the fact that the nation state, which was created 160 years ago in Bismarck's Germany, that gradually is becoming a outdated construct. It doesn't mean that anarchy lies ahead. It just means that we will live in a very different world in the next 10 years, a world where the global tech giants have a massive role to play in our lives. They end up actually taxing us more than perhaps our own government does. And through their platforms, we probably end up earning a livelihood, right? So for those who are interested in doing this, please visit us at invest.marcellus.in. There we put both our local offerings and our global offerings. The global offerings are through our branch in Cave City. Invest.marcellus.in is the one place through which you can access all of this.
Very, very well put, Saurabh. But however, there's a challenge that I can think of. As I listen to you, and I am on the verge of completing a Breakpoint, which is a very, very interesting book, and I would urge all of you to go through that, because that, through data, it tells you exactly what the picture looks like. So my last question to you, and let me push back a little on this, that if everyone, let's say, follows this advice and moves their money into the US and other big markets,
Mhm.
doesn't that just become, the next crowded trade? And if the nation state is weakening everywhere, as we were discussing, doesn't that include America too? Why is, the US typically the safest place to put money rather than just the next place? The same problem might show up.
Yeah. So look, I think you're right. Any market could get crowded. What's happened though is America, which used to account for only about a third of global profits 10 years ago, Bidisha, in the space of 10 years, America has gone from being a third of global profits. And it had been, by the way, at that third level for many decades. From a third in 2016, it's now more than a half of the world's profits. So the ascendancy of the tech giants whose products all of us on this pod are using every day, the ascendancy of the tech giants has led to an unbelievable surge in America's share of global profits, which stand now at north of 50%, right? Somewhere between 50 to 55% of the world's profits are ending up with listed companies in America, right? So, for example, we are users of Microsoft products in India. So Microsoft is listed in America. It's headquartered in Seattle. A big chunk of Microsoft's global profits are arising from India, right? But on that, it's accreting to America's market cap, Microsoft's market cap on the NYSE. So by investing in America, you are effectively investing in the whole world, right? If Microsoft India were listed, Vidisha, if Microsoft India, just Microsoft's Indian profits were listed, it would be by far the biggest listed company in India, by far, right? By a country mile, it would be the biggest listed company in India. That's how big Microsoft India is. Microsoft itself globally is colossal. It's Microsoft globally makes is bigger than the Microsoft by itself is bigger than the Indian stock market, and grows thrice as fast in terms of profitability compared to the Indian market. So the last decade has been literally earth-shattering in terms of the scale at which American tech giants have come to dominate the planet. And if you invest in the American tech giants, you're not really investing in America per se, you're investing in the whole world. Right? Ditto for I use Microsoft as an example. Microsoft by itself is bigger than the Indian market, grows thrice as fast. Same applies to Amazon, same applies to Alphabet, um, and Nvidia is bigger than all of these. Nvidia is far bigger than the Indian stock market now. So that's the scale at which the world has been changed, and that was why I was saying that what we are living through is a is a epoch defining shift, right? And that's why the nation state has been caught off guard. Remember, had this happened slowly, had this
Yeah.
transition in profitability, in technological might, had it happened slowly, the nation state would have adapted to it.
Right.
But because it's happened at such blistering speed, especially the last 6 years post COVID, there have
Mm.
been the speed of change has been so breathtakingly fast that I think the nation state has been caught off balance. And the result is, as we are discussing, Indian corporate capital is migrating to America. FII money is getting pulled out, and normal jobs are being replaced by global gig jobs. The global gig jobs literally are global, and hence the Indian taxman finds it very difficult to figure out where exactly the gig worker is earning his or her income.
Absolutely. And I feel like, the speed or the pace is also does have to do with the geopolitical risks as well. Because I mean, this is econ kind of 101. Because when there's money where foreign investors have put their money in emerging markets and there's some tension in the Middle East, the first thing they'll do is withdraw that money and put it in a safe place. And US Treasury markets happen to be that safe zone for them. Absolutely. I mean, thank you for breaking this down so clearly. It's a very, very imperative, topic to discuss and have further discussions on. Thank you for taking out the time and,
My pleasure.
breaking this down, in layman's terms for all of us. Thank you. And we're looking forward to more such episodes with you, Saurabh.
Thank you so much for hosting me, Disha. Very kind. Thank you.
Thank you.